Okay guys, welcome to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode I take a look at the 2005 movie Aeon Flux with Charlize Theron and forgettable others. There is a 9% on the tomato meter and a 39% on the audience score. This is a rotten movie. It's rotten by most everyone's standards. There's a reason why the critics give it a 9%, because there is no actual discernible standard movie plot in this film. In other words, it does not move through the classic story arcs that you would expect from a story in a film. It has Charlize Theron playing a character set in a post-apocalyptic future society, which in of itself, the society doesn't make a lot of logical sense. Without getting too deep into that, let's just say this is sci-fi that fails the basic logic of a sci-fi movie. And other than seeing Charlize Theron run around in a spandex or a skin-tight suit, there isn't a whole lot here. And for sci-fi fans, there isn't very much here either, because although there is a mystery that is discovered and a supposed plot twist to this story, it fails in every way. It's boring, it's cliched, and the characters, the villain, he's very shallow. Everybody in this film is very shallow. They're almost cardboard cutouts of characters, and yet we're supposed to take it serious when they're in danger, when they're under threat, when they're killed even, and yet we can't, because as an audience we've just got these cardboard cutout characters. And I suppose there's a real story buried in this from an animated series. Again, this is not something that's popular in the United States, and it certainly wasn't in 2005. So when I saw this thing, it came out on DVD. I saw it right away. I didn't have to pay to see it, and I'm glad I didn't have to pay, because other than seeing Charlize Theron in a skin-tight suit, there wasn't anything interesting here. It's illogical, and whatever fan following this has, like overseas, it doesn't have it in the US, it didn't have it in 2005, it doesn't have it now. So if you don't have something like a comic book story to fall upon to fill in the blanks, none of this really makes any sense. In fact, the ending of the movie, it's dissatisfying, because it just makes you wonder why these characters stayed in this city to begin with. To recap, all the characters are trapped inside of this city that it's its own society that's walled off from the outside world. There's nothing to prevent really the people from leaving other than a gigantic concrete wall around the city. There aren't devices or weapons from keeping the people, from leaving, and yet all the people just want to stay inside this city for hundreds of years, and they're not curious about what happens in the outside world. It just falls apart. There's a lot of different themes that uh, they're trying to use or steal or borrow from better films. None of them come across well. It's just convoluted nonsense. Even the plot points in which the main character, she escapes, she gets captured, for example, and she escapes from her cell, and then she goes on to sleep with the bad guy, and then it's just a mess. Like, none of it makes any sense, and it's just cardboard, cartoonish nonsense. So anyway, let's move into the audience reviews. Find out who disagrees with me. This is still a relevant film, because we have a review from 3 days ago, 3 stars. Charlize Theron in black spandex makes Aeon Flux worthwhile, but there are still enough loopholes to make this film fall short of its mark. Aeon Flux is a science fiction adventure film that includes a lot of intriguing ideas, some of which are left underdeveloped. The script, credited to Phil Hay and Matt Mandretti, based on Peter Chung's MTV animated shorts, doesn't seem to know whether it wants to be smart enough to appeal to serious-minded moviegoers or dumb enough to appeal to popcorn munchers. Yeah, it's kind of like trapped in limbo. It doesn't really work as a straight-up B-movie sci-fi film, because sci-fi fans will find it ridiculous and illogical, and it doesn't appeal to people wanting something else, because there isn't anything else. There's no comedy. The action's really bad. Like, for example, the action scenes where the protagonist is fighting the bad guys. it is cut and chopped in the editing in such a way as to make it seem believable, and yet in one scene that takes place over like 3 or 4 seconds, there will be 50 or more cuts in the action to show the woman character defeating the bad guys with some kind of martial arts style fighting. But obviously, this isn't something Charlize Theron would have been believable doing, and so they just used a lot of camera cuts, really choppy cuts, almost like going to the level of a Michael Bay style where the camera's moving around and chopping around so quick that you can't see exactly how Charlize Theron defeated the bad guys because it just kind of happens through all the cuts in the action. It's really bad. It's obvious that that's supposed to make a really bad action choreography work with all these camera cuts, the bad editing. So it's just so much of a fail on every level. Action movie people, they're going to pan this. Sci-fi fans are going to pan this. Somebody looking for a parody or a comedy is going to pan this. There's just absolutely nothing to be found here. It's completely dull and forgettable, and yet a lot of money was spent on trying to market this as some kind of great sci-fi action adventure. Yeah, a lot of wasted money. 2 stars from September 26th of 2019. You know, I would say this is like 1.5 stars for me. It's just got enough weird enough visual effect in it to be somewhat unique, although it's obvious this was shot in one particular location of some weird architecture building somewhere. You see a lot of the same type of architecture repeat itself, like it's been shot maybe in some kind of industrial park or something in Europe. But yeah, there's not the rest of it is all CGI, so it's very claustrophobic in its set design, and it comes across as cheap, although it's kind of interesting in weird and quirky ways. So again, I don't think it's more than 1.5 stars. Just as a sci-fi film, it doesn't even reach 2 stars for me. But anyway, let's continue. 2 stars. That's a big letdown for me. One-time watch. Yeah, I'll agree. I saw this one time on DVD, and that was enough. I wouldn't even put myself through this again to make this review better, because I don't think it would make the review better. I think we're going to get everything we need from these rotten reviews. 3 stars. Interesting story that was a bit bizarre at times. Half a star. Its strangeness is only surpassed by its boredom. 2.5 stars. Not English. 2 stars. A deeply flawed, shallow experience. Yeah, very shallow. The characters, although you get the idea of what they're supposed to do, they're very shallow and cardboard. You don't get tension, you don't get drama, you don't get a love story. You just get a mess because there's just nothing of substance here for anybody. 4 stars. Finally got around to watching it. Sometimes you just need a dystopian fix. This will scratch the itch. You do kind of have to shut off your brain, but it's an okay premise, I suppose. No, it's way too boring to get above 2 stars. Sorry. I give it 1.5 stars. 2 stars. Frankly, the plot of this movie makes absolutely no logical sense. You are given maybe 20 seconds of exposition via narration at the beginning of the film, and things just get more confusing from there. The action sequences were okay, though. No, I disagree completely. The action sequences were really bad, and it was just like a lot of cuts in the editing to make it look like the action was passable. It's a complete fail. Yes, there was 20 seconds or more of exposition at the beginning of narration by Charlize Theron that just kind of in a boring way sets up that we're in a post-apocalyptic walled-off society. You know, it wasn't necessary. She didn't tell us anything in that exposition, that narration, that we couldn't get from watching another 5 minutes into it, so it was just a waste of Charlize Theron's voice, and it was boring too on top of it. 3 stars. Aeon Flux is a mess, but it's a fascinating and intriguing mess. Aeon Flux is a science fiction adventure film that includes a lot of intriguing ideas, some of which are left underdeveloped. I've read this one before, and I'll say that every idea here is half-baked and underdeveloped, so a sci-fi fan would just pan this thing. 2.5 stars. Utterly nonsensical and humbly bland to the convoluting point to just mutually not care due to the lacks of efforts. Well, also too generic in the choppily edited action. Yeah, all the action's all chopped up in different cuts because obviously it wouldn't have worked otherwise. The characters, the side characters are meaningless. One of them is very strange. Like one girl character has replaced her feet with hands. She's had human hands grafted onto her feet. Either that or she's had her feet genetically modified to be hands. Either way, she's turned herself into like a monkey. It's very strange. It kind of makes it worth watching to see if it'll do anything with this strangeness. But again, it's so bland and unused, and they don't do anything with it. So what's the point? 4 stars. I only wish the movie was longer, but love the visual effects. If the movie was longer, maybe we would have had other pointless love scenes that had a lot of talking. Because, you couldn't even tell if the villain was the villain in this movie, because at one point he's the villain. He's the guy running this society. He's the bad guy. And yet the protagonist is sleeping with him, and he's talking things over with her in an almost romantic type way at another part in the story. It doesn't work. It doesn't even. It can't even fulfill the standard hero-villain plot. Is what I was trying to say at the beginning. That's why it doesn't work for anybody, because no matter what kind of movie you want to say it is, it defies every archetype. It doesn't want to be defined somehow, so it just fails at everything. 5 stars. Cannot believe Rotten Tomatoes gives more than 50% for Kingsman Secret Service. Shart, and this one gets 9%. Total BS, the worst review ever. No, I completely disagree. The reason Kingsman gets better reviews than this is because Kingsman showed us a lot of things we hadn't seen before. Yes, it's a crazy, cartoonish, over-the-top, self-parody James Bond type of vehicle. But you know what? The Kingsman, just in the action alone, had so much inventive stuff we had never seen before, done in amazing ways, with amazing effects. The pacing was perfect in both Kingsman movies. The pacing was perfect. I don't care how ridiculous the plot was. The action of Kingsman was refreshing. It was invigorating. The pacing was perfect. And it was stuff we hadn't seen before. This movie deserves 9%. It does. So don't bring Kingsman into this, please. 3 stars. Not the best movie in any regard, but attention was given to futurism and exciting action, worth the watch if you're a sci-fi fan. The story is not as convoluted as the other critics make it out to be, but it's very likely that the movie is being rated more by what was expected from its source material. Severely underrated. I largely disagree, because I don't know anybody at the time this movie came out that was familiar with the source material. The source material itself is very obscure, in North America at least, so I disagree. If they expected people to know what this was other than just another sci-fi movie, they were severely stupid, because Aeon Flux, whatever kind of animated thing it is, MTV or whatever it is, I don't know and I don't care. It's irrelevant, and it was irrelevant in 2005. So this movie couldn't make it just on the name of some more relevant work. So don't say that this is underrated just because it didn't live up to fanboys' expectations. I didn't watch this from the perspective of being a fanboy, and neither did most everybody else. That we just wanted a decent sci-fi movie, and we wanted to see Charlize Theron in her cat suit do something we hadn't seen before, at least make us believe that she was doing things, and at least make the action believable, right? It didn't even do that. It failed, and it was boring. 1 star. Seems like they didn't understand the show. They missed everything by a mile. Another ripoff with too many compromises just to put butts in seats. Terrible. Well, yeah, again, this reviewer suggesting that there's some source material that's better than this. I disagree on that. If it's so relevant, if there's some Aeon Flux animated thing out there that's so incredible, how come I've never heard of this? Really? Guess what? It's not relevant, is it? It's not so incredible, is it? So let's not say that they ripped it off and they didn't do a good job of ripping it off. That's why it failed. No, it failed because just as a sci-fi action movie, this thing sucks. Nobody that paid tickets to see this thing, I would hazard to guess that more than 90% of the public that paid a ticket to see this in the theater didn't know anything that there was any such animated thing called Aeon Flux. That's just flat out the way it was. So I disagree, even though I'll agree. Yeah, 1 star, sure. 3.5 stars. This is a pretty good rendition of the original series, if you ask me. Theron aces this and sells the character beautifully. See, that's funny. You have one review saying in July of 2018 that this is a complete terrible ripoff and it doesn't do service or justice to the source material, and yet the very review that came before in March of 2018 is saying how great this rendition of the original series is. Which is it? Again, I'll make the case that the reason why you see stark contrasts in this source material is because the source material itself sucks and is irrelevant and is obscure. So sorry, fanboys, you're both wrong. 1 star, horribly boring movie with a juvenile plot. Yeah, yeah, but it's not even juvenile because there are sci-fi movies with juvenile plots that still go through the proper story arcs and everything. They're predictable, they're dull, but they still have good action. This was like worse than just having a juvenile plot. This was just like it failed to be anything. 1 star, poorly written and directed, so incredibly cheesy, failed to bring the animated series to a live-action feature-length film. Yeah, again, referencing some animated series, and again, I'll say irrelevant. 1.5 stars, cool ideas and interesting concepts, very poorly passed, watched under the influence. Okay, so maybe because of the influence, you gave it more than half a star. Okay. 4.5 stars, unique superhero thriller with cool effects and good fight scenes. You know, I'm not sure that Aeon Flux is actually a superhero. She's just a woman with some acrobatic skills in tight spandex, and she she can whistle to some nanotechnology controlled metal balls of some type. I didn't get that she's any kind of superhero. She's just a weirdo. Even within the confines of her own fictional world, she's considered a weirdo and an outcast. So, superhero, no, I'm sorry, I don't see it. 4 stars. I have a copy on HD DVD that I have not been able to watch in quite a while. I recently located and bought a Blu-ray copy from Best Buy. All I can say is wow. It's not 4K HDR, but the color and graphics are breathtaking. Don't try to analyze the logic of the story, just enjoy. So maybe you just like Charlize in her cat suit. Okay, if that's what it is, then okay. 1 star, although I love Charlize, but she does have some weird movies. Yeah, she's got weird movies, but this one's just like a dud. I think, you know, even she was in, what is it, the Road Warrior movie? I don't know what the exact title of it is, the newest Mad Max Road Warrior. I don't know. You'll have to just hate on me for not knowing the name. But anyway, she plays weird characters. She played a weird character, a serial killer in Monster. And yeah, they're weird, but they're workable and they're entertaining. This just was not entertaining, and it was just a dud. But don't say it's because she's weird or anything. No, anybody else could have replaced her in this movie, and the movie would have been just as bad. It wasn't that she dragged it down, and it wasn't like she could have saved it. This movie was just bad. The script itself was a dud. 5 stars. This is actually pretty good. I hate that people are saying this lacks the gravity-defying pace. You guys lack imagination. So here's somebody, probably a fanboy of the original source material, saying that you have to use your imagination in this film. Like, you know, it's just as incredible as the animated series because you have to use your imagination. I'm sorry, but I thought that's what special effects were for, so we didn't have to use our imagination. This is a movie, right? It's not a book. So I disagree. Half a star. Damn, Charlize looks amazing, though. Yeah, for her age, yeah, she looked pretty good in the catsuit. 4 stars. I thought it was an okay movie. Good acting, interesting storyline, original ideas for action scenes. Theron was good in it. It's like you're very easy to please because this isn't even good for B-movie sci-fi stuff. It's just boring. 3.5 stars. Charlize carries this cyberpunk action film. It's not cyberpunk. It's more like science fiction weird. It's not cyberpunk. Cyberpunk's got more like people jacking into electronic devices. In this one, it features cloning as a thing. There's no real cyberpunk stuff. Now, maybe the original source material, the animated whatever it is, that's cyberpunk. Okay, maybe. I haven't seen it. This one doesn't have anything to do with any cyberpunk of anything, really. Half a star. Wow, sucks hard. Dialogue is horrific. No character development and a very weak plot. Why should I care about any of these mumbling, violent nitwits? The huge moral dilemma is crashing a blimp through a wall. Really? Charlize is certainly lovely, but fails to duplicate or exceed the original character. I want my 90 minutes back. Well, I do agree with something here. Yeah, the mumbling, violent nitwit. Yeah, the big bad villain and his, I don't know, sidekicks or enforcers or whatever. Yeah, they all just kind of stand around and like deliver flat wooden lines and talk like softly, very soft-spokenly. It's not exactly like an action villain type of thing. It's very strange. It's another reason why this sucker fails at the script level. 1.5 stars. Terrible action movie starring Charlize Theron. I love Charlize Theron, and she's the only reason I watched this movie in the first place. And now to see that she had a bad movie after winning an Oscar for Monster, I was shocked. I was hyped for this movie, and what a disappointment this movie is. I expected a lot more than action and Charlize Theron. This movie had potential, but they blew it. Terrible movie, would never see it again. Yeah, if you look at the box cover for the DVD, yeah, there's your potential, and then as soon as you pop that disc in and start to watch it, it all goes downhill, starting with the narrative from Charlize Theron that sets up the sci-fi scenario, and you're just like, wow, I feel boring and dead inside already, and that's the feeling you get, and it never quite goes away. 5 stars. Amazing lines and visuals in the movie, some of the most original visual shapes in any film. Well worth watching. Charlize lends her superb acting. This film was ahead of its time and had an ambitious goal. I completely disagree. It's like you're watching a different movie. There was nothing original visual shapes. Not really. It looked like it was all filmed in one small section of one commercial or industrial park. No, I didn't get what you're saying. 5 stars. I was really surprised when I saw the poor ratings for this movie. I just watched it in 2017 and it was awesome. Well, if you just watched it on Netflix and you watched other Netflix, real bad Netflix stuff before this, then yeah, this probably the production budget just wowed you because it does have the production budget. It's just too bad it didn't do anything with it. 1 star, very bland action film. It's like it's even debatable that you can call this an action film. It's a 1 hour and 32 minutes of like things that are cut up a lot and chopped up in the editing where it could pass for action, but there's not really any action. There's a lot of talking going on. 5 stars. One of my favorite movies of all time. Wow, you're easy to please. 3 stars. In 2011, a deadly pathogenic virus has killed 99% of the Earth's population, forcing the survivors to regroup and scatter across the Earth. 404 years later, in late 2415, all of the survivors inhabit Bregna, a walled futuristic city-state which is ruled by a congress of scientists. Although Bregna is largely an idyllic place in the destroyed Earth, people routinely disappear and the population suffers from nightmares. A skilled warrior named Aeon Flux, Charlize Theron, is a member of the Monarchins, an underground. Yeah, that's, aside from that long synopsis, yeah, it's told to us that there's this rebel group in society, in this futuristic society, by the name of the Monarchins. And, they're an underground society. And yet it's kind of funny that Charlize Theron walks around, obviously, in the costume of a mannequin, walking around in public, sticks out like a sore thumb amongst all the other crowds of people in this, utopian city. And nobody's supposed to know she's a mannequin. It's kind of like if I dressed up in a gigantic, Halloween vampire costume and walked through the middle of a shopping mall, and then nobody's going to notice that I'm sticking out and that I might have a problem or that I'm late to a costume ball. It's not believable, and somehow the government has trouble finding her and those of her comrades when they're obviously dressed like mannequins and rebels, and they're dressed like people that don't fit in with society, and they're walking around in broad daylight, and yet they're supposed to be like some kind of underground movement that stays in the shadows. It doesn't make any damn sense right off the bat, so it fails. Just the plot logic alone fails this thing. 2.5 stars. The movie is all style, no entertainment. The story is dull and slow with bland action and a boring lead. A missed opportunity to create something unique, but the movie was basically copying others that came before it anyway. It had a lot of things thrown together. It had like repressed memories, amnesia of the main character, cloning facilities, a conspiracy behind the cloning facilities. It had a bad guy villain that wasn't really a bad guy. He was just misunderstood. It had a walled city that kind of resembled like something from, the old 70s Logan's Run, and yet there was no explanation on why the people that were obviously becoming dissatisfied by their leadership just never thought to leave the place. Although there's nothing really stopping them, there's just big walls, but there aren't exactly machine gun turrets on the walls or anything to keep them in. They're just big walls. I mean, what's to stop them from just like flying over them in one of these flying blimps that they show? A lot of it just doesn't make any sense just from plot logic. It would fail just a B movie, sci-fi B movies plot logic. It just doesn't add up. 3 stars. I thought it was a pretty good movie. Half a star. Got a license to a cool anime and drove it off a cliff. 5 stars. Really liked it. Very different. 2 stars. This sci-fi thriller wasn't entirely bad. I was actually expecting far worse. Good acting from Charlize Theron, though, but I understand why it bombed at the box office. There wasn't any particular good or bad acting from Charlize Theron. She was generic and bland enough that anybody else could have done the same thing. There was nothing that stood out at all. You could barely call it acting, really. 3 stars. While the film failed to live up to the lofty standards set by the short-lived animated MTV series, I applaud this fresh take on a cult classic. I disagree that it's a cult classic. I really disagree. It's too obscure for that. But I'll continue. I give high marks for visual appeal as the cinematics and design were aesthetically pleasing. From the leads to supporting roles, nearly all performances spot on. No, they're all forgettable. They're all cardboard, and there's no actual performances to be found here, I'm afraid. Even the villain, who's had decent roles, the actor that plays the villain, yeah, I've seen him. I don't even know his name. He's not that standout, but I've seen him in many other movies, and he's done a good job in other movies. And this one, he just plays a villain that stands around, talks a lot, and talks real softly, and doesn't really show. He's wooden. He's completely wooden. He doesn't show emotion. I don't know how anybody gets something about there's actual acting performances involved in this movie. There really aren't. 1 star. An uninteresting plot broken up by uninteresting action sequences. Yeah, the action's not even action, it's just a lot of camera cuts. 5 stars. I love the concept of it. 4 stars. 2016, pretty good. 2 stars. No meat, just potatoes, and it's just not enough to stand out significantly in this competitive genre. I think the film was sound and intriguing until the heroine breaches the futuristic compound and the dicey plot with Trevor Goodchild is revealed. You're putting way too much thought into this. There's not meat or potatoes here. It's completely just boring and forgettable. 1.5 stars. Paper-thin acting, plot, and just about everything else. The only reason to watch this movie is if you want to see Charlize Theron run around in dominatrix garb for an hour and a half. Yeah, basically, she looks pretty good for her age in that kind of garb, but yeah, even that kind of fails, because there are other women in this underground, rebellious society that's going on, these mannequins, but yet they're not done up all sexy. So it kind of fails in that regard too, because most B movies, if they're going to present to you some rebel female archetype that's in hot clothes, then all her compatriots are going to be like that too. But in this movie, it just doesn't want to give you that satisfaction either. So it kind of fails even in the B movie realm. It just doesn't even deliver the sexy like it could have. So I'm saying again, it's a fail. 1.5 stars. I remember the MTV cartoon. This is just hard to follow. I don't remember the MTV cartoon, and I'm kind of glad, because I think whatever it is largely obscure and irrelevant. 4.5 stars. I love this comic and anime, so the movie in my eyes stayed true to them, plus Charlize Theron is awesome. 3 stars, the movie is visually interesting. 4 stars, I enjoyed all of it. A great science fiction movie, underrated by Hallmark Channel critics. Okay, I don't know if this could appear on the Hallmark Channel because in order for this to appear on the Hallmark Channel, Charlize Theron would have to have a scene in which not only is she captured by the villain, but maybe she's like abused in some way and slapped around in some way, and maybe she'll somehow like stab the villain in the bed with tears streaming down her face and run off in the middle of the night. I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine how they're bringing Hallmark Channel into this. I say that if anything, the critics should have rated this lower because I'm surprised they didn't fall asleep while they were critiquing it. 4 stars, I am quite surprised, astounded even that this movie has not received better ratings. It holds a meager 5.5 at IMDb. Rotten Tomatoes ratings are, as usual, pure nonsense with a 10% rating and a big rotten icon. Personally, I think this is much undeserved. Yes, the movie is a bit silly at times, and yes, it does not take a genius to figure out roughly what is about to happen, nor what has happened in the mysterious past. Still, the movie is visually stunning. I'm sorry, there's nothing stunning about this, so I completely disavow and will not acknowledge your 4 stars. I say 1.5 stars. 3.5 stars, an interesting transhumanist look at a dystopian future. I don't know what film you're watching, but it wasn't this one. Again, we're looking at Aeon Flux. No, it wasn't on the Hallmark Channel. It has a 39% audience score, 9% on the tomato meter. I think, the best thing about this is just the box cover with Charlize Theron posing kind of sexy against that blue background. That's the highlight of this thing, guys. Sorry, but it is. And so I'm going to see you all again on another episode of Rotten Reviews.